Pokémon Sun and Moon represents the 7th generation of the long-term video game franchise, and in this, the 20th year anniversary of Pokémon as a whole, the game tries to slightly tinker with the adventure as well as a refinement of core mechanics, but what long-term fans of the series will quickly notice is that the same core game remains, and you should feel familiar picking it up for the very first time, and at the same time, newcomers should feel just as well at home if this is the very first Pokémon game that they have ever played. More on this during the review. In typical Pokemon fashion, you begin the game the exact same way as you always do in previous games, with a slight twist in that instead of being a native of the region of ALOLA, which is the main setting of the game, which is basically a fictionalized representation of what Hawaii would be, you are instead now a newcomer who has just moved in from the region of Kanto, which was the main setting of Generation 1 during the original Red and Blue, which released 20 years ago. You start the game like you always do by choosing one of 3 starters of either fire, grass, or water. And without diving into too many story spoilers, what you'll quickly notice is that the story isn't focused on you, the trainer, at all. While the story is actually more focused and the narrative is more focused on the circumstances around other characters that you're going to meet throughout the entire game. And this is a nice change in pace because since the focus is no longer on just collecting 8 badges, challenging the Elite Four and becoming champion, it allows the game to explore different themes and circumstances that have basically been non-existent in previous Pokemon games and not really highlighted at all. So I definitely think that this is a nice change of pace. And as well, if you are a long-term fan of the series, there are a ton of nods and Easter eggs hinting at events that have happened in previous games, which is a nice change in pace and really fun when you encounter them for the very first time. So despite some slight changes to the gameplay, the core mechanics of Pokemon Sun and Moon are basically the same as the games that came out 20 years ago. Probably the biggest change is the removal of the gym leader system. So in previous games, you travel the region and defeat 8 strong trainers of the region, collect badges, and the 8 badges would allow you to challenge the Elite Four of the region and eventually be on your way to becoming the champion of the area. Instead, what you have now is, instead of the gym leader system, you have something called the Island Challenge system, which is no longer just kind of tied to defeating a gym leader. There are various puzzles, various events that have to take place, and at the end of it, most likely you're going to be challenging some super powered Pokemon that is from the area. What this allows is that with the removal of the gym system, the narrative is more about exploring rather than just trying to get to the end goal of collecting 8 badges, which gives the island a little bit of a more of an intimate feel. It allows you to explore a little bit more, and at the same time just gives you an opportunity to stray off into a different path rather than trying to be hyper focused. So this is something that the game does extremely well, especially since the different challenges are very varied and no 2 challenges are the same, and at the same time you still meet some really cool characters along the way that you can interact with, each with their unique feel and flavor. Personally myself though, I still prefer the 8 gym leader battle system, but I do commend Nintendo and Game Freak for stepping out of the box and trying something new. But at the end of the day, like I said, I still prefer the 8 gym leader battle system. And the reason for that, I think it just makes the encounters with the new characters that you meet throughout the game just a lot more memorable, because you tie that memory into a specific battle for a badge. And not only does it make the encounters with the characters a lot more memorable, it makes the cities and the environments a lot more memorable too, because you tie a specific gym leader to a badge, which in turn you tie it to a specific city. So like I said, even though I commend them for trying new things, I think that with the next game, I really do hope that they move back to the 8 gym leader battle system. Another welcome change, which is long overdue, is the removal of the HM system, or the hidden machine system, which was set in place to somewhat kind of limit the player's movement from the onset of the game into different areas of the map. So instead now we have the ride system, which allows you to summon a Pokemon at any time that you want and allows you to do different varying degrees such as flying, rock smashing, and this allows you to free up an attack on one of your Pokemon that was very difficult to delete until you moved into further along into the game. And like I said, it's something that has just been really long overdue and is definitely welcomed. Probably the biggest change to the battle system is the introduction of Z moves, which are basically superpowered attacks that you can execute once per match, and they're usually tied to a specific element. However, some specific Pokemon have exclusive ones that are identifiable to them. Z moves function almost the exact way as Mega Evolution did from the previous generation, in that they require a specific stone for your Pokemon to hold, and once they hold it, you can execute one per turn, and they do a tremendous amount of damage, and the animation for each one is actually pretty cool when you watch it for the very first time. Another mechanic that has been refined from a previous generation is the Pokemon refresh system. So as you battle with Pokemon, they can take in some status effect. Instead of now having to rely on the item, you can actually manually remove the status effect. Personally myself, I wasn't a huge fan of it, and because I would prefer just to instantly use an item and not have to use the stylus to remove a status effect. But at the same time, you can also raise your Pokemon's affinity towards you by giving it a massage or feeding it some berries. But personally myself, like I said, I wasn't a huge fan of this system at all, just because it took up a little bit of extra time, which I didn't really want to spend. But what is nice is that the game actually noticed that I wasn't using the system at all. So after a while of not using the refresh system when prompted to, it just stopped asking me to do it, which is a nice effect that I really did appreciate, that the game learned that I wasn't using the system at all and adapted along the way. Any seasoned Pokemon trainer will know that once you beat the quote-unquote main story of the game, the post-game is really when the game opens up. There are a ton of new areas to explore, a ton of high-powered Pokemon for you to catch, and as well, that's when you'll find the majority of the legendary Pokemon that you can catch as well. And Pokemon Sun and Moon is no exception. There is a very lengthy post-game side quest that will give you access to a ton of new legendary Pokemon, each which look very unique and have their own special abilities. And as well, it also unlocks the battle tree in the post game, which is somewhat similar to the Battle Frontier. However, it doesn't have the same amount of depth as the Battle Frontier did back in the Pokemon Emerald days, but it still offers a great amount of challenge to even the most seasoned Pokemon veterans out there to reach the top and claim the ultimate victory of Battle Tree. Pokemon Sun and Moon does a great job of creating its environment, and it does this by not taking itself too seriously. You wouldn't expect to find a cowboy ranch on Hawaiian Island, you just wouldn't. But I think this type of freedom and diversity really allows you to kind of keep things fresh. You never know exactly what's around the corner. You never know what type of Pokemon that you're going to be encountering in the future. And since they've gotten rid of the gym system, it just keeps things a little bit more free-flowing and moving. This, coupled with the very distinct Pokemon music that we have been accustomed to basically within the last 20 years, it just keeps everything new and exciting, and you never know what's around the corner. What you quickly notice as you're playing Pokemon Sun and Moon, that despite the small technical graphical upgrades, being able to move around a little bit more freer and more naturally, and being able to interact with the world a little bit more, that the 3DS hardware is definitely outdated for this game, and this will most likely be the last generation of Pokemon on the 3DS hardware, and it's definitely solely needed a technical upgrade, especially when you consider the frame rate takes significant hits, especially when there are more than 2 Pokemon on the screen at once, as well during these superpower Z moves, which are the signature of the game. Once again, the frame rate just takes a plummet downwards, and it's really noticeable. And what you also notice is that the use of 3D is used very limited. It had very limited use in this game, which is probably a good thing, because that would have made the frame rate suffer even more. So I'm really looking forward to upgraded hardware, the next Nintendo handheld and the next generation of Pokemon to come out. Then we can maybe finally have some voice acting, because I think it's long overdue. I know Nintendo is very hesitant to voice acting in their game, but I think it is a game that is definitely warrants some voice acting. As an RPG at its core, I feel like the immersion is slightly taken away from it if you don't have at least some of the NPCs and some of the other characters talking to you. So that's something that I really am looking forward to in the next game, that they finally incorporate some voice acting into the game. At the end of the day, Pokemon Sun and Moon is an enjoyable experience to series veterans as well as newcomers alike. There are some changes that I welcome with open arms, but at the same time, there are some changes while I do appreciate Nintendo trying to take the series in a new direction, I think I prefer the old method as well. At the core though, the game remains exactly the same as the games we were playing 20 years ago, which is probably why we are in the 7th generation, because it just works. So there's also some technical issues that are limited by the 3DS, which I hope get addressed with the next generation of handheld consoles for Nintendo. But until then, I enjoyed my experience the entire way through, and I can't wait until the next game comes out as well, and we will continue our journey in catching them all.